I can't.
But Larry Klayman, your founder, has sued your organization and you. I don't know whether you can answer
a countersuit. Yeah, and we have a countersuit.
You have a countersuit,
right?
And one of the things that I read that is he wanted his job back.
That's right.
And
but I can't comment about the litigation though.
But he left you when and ran for the Senate in Florida.
Larry Klayman left in 2003.
And did he run for the Senate?
He ran for the Senate. That's right.
And on what party?
He ran. I think he ran as a Republican in their primary.
Had he hired you, by the way, originally?
Yeah.
Other things on the list that you've involved with and filed for are something to do with Eric Holder, the Attorney General's Nation of Cowards speech. What did you do there?
Well, we complained about it, where you had the Attorney General, suggesting all Americans were cowards because they didn't speak about race, and I thought it was a kind of a temperamental comment by an Attorney General who's supposed to be neutral, and every American is supposed to have faith that the Attorney General is going to fairly administer the law. And when he starts saying that we're a nation of cowards based on race, it just seems to me inappropriate. And my understanding was the Obama White House wasn't too pleased by his words either.
Is this a case where you just put a press release out?
Yeah. Yeah, but Holder's nomination we oppose generally.
Because?
Because we think he acted inappropriately in a variety of matters during his tenure at the Clinton administration, and I can list them. He acted inappropriately with the pardons of
Mark Rich
and others. He acted inappropriately with the violent raid on the peaceful protesters in the home of Elian Gonzalez's family that took Elian Gonzalez out at gunpoint and brought him back to Fidel Castro's Cuba. He acted inappropriately, I believe, in helping to tamp down any investigations of the Clinton fundraising abuses we had talked about earlier, where you had credible information that the president and the vice president had acted illegally, and Janet Reno and Eric Holder did their darndest to make sure, and successfully so, that an independent counsel wouldn't be appointed despite what the law required.
Let me ask you the same thing I asked Melanie Sloan. Is this a way that your contributors can still play in the political game without having a limit on the number of dollars they can spend by giving you a lot of money and having you front for them in doing this thing by opposing Eric Holder and his confirmation? You're basically involved in the political system, and they don't have to contribute. They don't have to limit on how much money they give.
Well, I hadn't thought about it that way. I mean, we see ourselves as neutral participants in the public policy arena on topics that we care about. And we can't endorse or oppose candidates, and we don't. We generally don't even take positions on most legislation unless it's tremendously important or there's a highly significant nomination. So, I think our donors see us as a watchdog, and they're a watchdog in Washington.
Has the IRS ever questioned your expenditures?
Yeah, we were audited by the IRS during the Clinton years. And we believe it was because the Clinton White House sent a note over to the IRS, a complaint over to the IRS, and we got audited.
You believe that, but you don't know that.
We do, because we have the documents.
How did you get the documents?
Through the Freedom of Information Act. We were audited, and we used the Freedom of Information Act to find out about the genesis of the audit.
What do you do when a government agency stalls on a Freedom of Information Act request? Just keeps putting it at the back of the file?
It depends on what our priorities and resources are and what the nature of the request is. In the end, after a month or two, we can file suit. We can file suit relatively quickly if we so choose, but there are administrative appeals one needs to take.
Is there a court here in the district that always takes these cases?
Yeah, you generally sue in the District of Columbia here, the district court here, the federal district court.
And are there judges that like the FOIA Act and others that don't? And then can you find the judge that you want in these cases?
When one files a case, it's randomly assigned to an individual judge. So we can't pick and choose and forum shop in that regard.
But do they make a difference which judge you get?
Sometimes. I find, generally speaking, there's this myth in many respects in Washington about the separation of powers and how the judge how the judiciary is a check on the executive branch. Too often in FOIA litigation, it seems to me it's one wall we're facing, and
the government.
Yes, and the courts are by and large very deferential to the government in FOIA. So when we beat the government back on FOIA, and we do that often, it just shows you how egregious the misconduct of the government is, because generally speaking, the courts will defer to the government in terms of accepting their explanations as to where things stand and
why is that?
It's precedent. They are deferential to government. So, as a non-lawyer, I should just warn you. It's my understanding that it's the nature of the law. But you know, in many ways, they just assume the government is acting in good faith at times where I don't think they ought to.
Also on the list here is Evan Bayh's financial disclosure statements. What's that about?
Well, that was a twofer, because that was Evan Bayh and Hillary Clinton. They had family foundations that they had not disclosed as required by law on their financial Senate disclosure forms, and we complained to the Senate Ethics Committee about this. We pointed out it was not only a violation of the rules to not fill these out completely and truthfully, but also a violation of federal. And of course, the Senate Ethics Committee gave both senators a pass on it. It was a mistake. You know, it shows you what the difference is between those of us who may fill out government forms wrong and be held to account and get fined and all of that, versus senators who fill out forms core to the ethics enforcement in our city, and they get a pass from the Ethics Committee in the Senate charged with making sure they do the right thing.
What was your reaction to the contempt citation and the dropping of the charges against Ted Stevens?
I was disappointed. I believe that it would have been appropriate to give Senator Stevens another trial, but I think he needed to be held to account. I think there was a lot of evidence not impacted by the allegations of misconduct that would have led a jury to presume that he was guilty, or to find him guilty. And not only did that decision by Eric Holder not only help that politician Ted Stevens, but it helps other politicians under the gun like Murtha, and Chris Dodd, who is also, we have allegations about false financial disclosure statements, because the key development in the Stevens prosecution was the government didn't prosecute him for bribery or extortion, but for filing these false financial disclosure statements. And I think the ending of the Stevens prosecution took the wind of the sails of any other pending investigations along those lines.
What is your reaction to the coverage and the attention Chris Dodd has gotten for several allegations that involve, in your case, you went after him for Ireland, but what's your take on the way the newspapers have approached him and the way people like you approached him? Are they making any headway, or should they?
Well, Chris Dodd needs to worry about how he's being perceived in Connecticut. I mean, Washington is its own world. I mean, what may be important or unimportant in Washington really has nothing to do with what everyday Americans think about. And I was actually a little bit surprised about how poorly politically Dodd is evidently doing in Connecticut. You know, but my understanding is this whole countrywide scandal where he obtained sweetheart mortgages, it looks like from Countrywide, a company very dependent on the government action in many ways, really hit people and their pocketbooks. Everyone gets mortgages. They know how difficult it is to get good rates, and they resent when politicians get good rates, seemingly because they're politicians. And it's not only unlawful, but people think it's not fair. And Americans are fair, and they don't like cheaters. And Dodd is perceived to be a cheater, so that's why he's doing poorly in Connecticut. We'll see what happens. But in Washington, you know, Washington just doesn't seem to care about it. And you know, the issue of corruption, it seems to me politicians only talk about it at election time and then forget about it the rest of the year. And I include members of both parties on that.
Melanie Sloan,